All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. What I'm going to be talking about is a little bit of controversial, especially for a Drupal meetup. But I'm going to be talking about when not to use Drupal. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because I've noticed that a lot of presentations that you go to and a lot of Drupal conferences, it's all about Drupal. And they always say, hey, you should use Drupal for everything. And that's usually the takeaway. And the whole point of this presentation is not to turn you off of Drupal. That's actually not my intentions with this. So I want to make sure that I add that disclaimer that I'm not some disgruntled developer who used to work on Drupal and now I don't, so therefore I don't want anybody else to. I still love Drupal. But I feel it's important for you to be pragmatic when you're making decisions about what technology you build your site with. And in some situations, Drupal is not the answer. It's not the best thing. So I realize this is a Drupal meetup. I'm talking about when not to use Drupal. So might as well be insulting the Pope, right? So hopefully it's not like that. My name is Travis Tidwell. You can find me. You can actually find this presentation online if you guys want to follow along with me online. It's travistidwell.com/presentations/not Drupal. There's a couple of links there. One is my GitHub profile, so you can kind of see some other software projects that I've contributed. One of my software projects very recently went viral. It was a script to order you a sandwich online, to where you can. Does anybody know the XKCD comic where it says "sudo make me a sandwich"? Mm-hmm. I created a script where all you have to do is type "sudo make me a sandwich" in the terminal, and it goes out to Jimmy John's website and orders you a sandwich for you. So that's my latest creation. And then of course my Twitter handle is software node. All right, so again, I want to add this disclaimer that I'm not hating on Drupal at all. I love Drupal. In fact, Drupal is it's an amazing tool, and often you'll hear people say it can do everything, and it can do everything. In fact, especially whenever you're first starting off with Drupal, you get this empowerment when you finally realize what Drupal can do. And a lot of people who are just getting started with Drupal say, wow, you can do all these amazing things. I can therefore do anything I want on the web using this amazing tool. And that's a lot of the impressions that people get. In fact, that's how I thought. That's the impression I got. Because it could do everything, I wanted to build everything in it. And I was, in ways, bewitched by this amazing technology. But the fact that it can do everything is kind of the problem. And it's a problem that I want to address today. And I want to be as objective as I possibly can. Because I think that's really important, especially whenever you're about to invest in a technology, when you're going to build a product, that you have to be objective whenever you're evaluating. Very often what happens whenever you're a Drupal shop or you're a person in those shoes who just learned Drupal and you're really excited about the technology and you come across a customer and that customer says, you know, I really want a web application that does blank. And blank can be anything. Very often I hear the phrase that comes directly after that, which is, yeah, Drupal can do that. And a lot of people use that terminology. Drupal can do that. I know how to do that in Drupal. What I would like for people to do is stop saying, yeah, Drupal can do that. There's even mottos out there, do it with Drupal. You know, it's really trying to give people the impression that you should do everything that you want using the Drupal platform. What we really should start saying instead is, yeah, Drupal should do that. And being able to identify the situations that is pragmatic for Drupal to accomplish a task, and whenever you should identify when it shouldn't be used for a task. And that's really what I want to talk about in this presentation. So the big question comes up, which is, okay, so what should Drupal do? And then what should it not do? I mean, there's this big question of, okay, now what? In fact, a lot of conferences you go to, they only focus on what it should do. And they're two completely different questions. And in fact, a lot of times what it shouldn't do is kind of obscured a little bit by these discussions of, oh yeah, it can do that, so therefore you should do it that way. What I really want us to do is just thinking about what are the right tools for the job. You know, like trying to pick, you have an objective that you want to build something. I want to find the right tool that's going to be the best for what I want to do. In order for me to have a really good discussion about what Drupal should and should not do, I think it's really important for us to go kind of back to its roots and talk about what Drupal was intended to do. And Drupal is and was intended to be a content management system. It's always promoted that, a content management system. But a lot of people, when they hear that content management system, they immediately think, oh, I have content, therefore, and I want to manage that content, so therefore I need a content management system. I want to make a very important point, which is just because you have a content to manage does not mean you need a content management system. Every website has content. Every website. It's how you wish to manage it is what's important, is an important thing to realize whenever you start evaluating Drupal as a solution. How do you want to manage it? How are people interacting on this website? What is your idea on the total flow of software? What I really like to tell people whenever they ask me, okay, what is Drupal really? If it's not a content management system, I like to say Drupal really should be considered a content workflow management system. And what I mean by that is Drupal makes a total sense when your system is concerned with managing content workflows between multiple users. That is where Drupal shines and is the best. It is the best solution for that type of environment. So let's think about that. Okay, a system that is concerned with managing content workflows between multiple users. So obviously I'm talking about a system that has many different users. These users have different roles based on what they can do with that system. And they also work together to collaborate on some type of content managing system. If you were wanting to build that system from scratch, that would be a hard system to build. In fact, I would say don't do that, use Drupal. Drupal is perfect for that. The problem is that type of use case kind of throws it into the category of not many websites using it. So I'm going to make another really bold statement here and say that the majority of Drupal websites should not have been built with Drupal. And I mean that. I totally mean that. And that's a pretty bold statement to make. But if you actually go look at the, like let's say all the places where you see all of the websites that have been built, like Acquia has one, the showcases, that's the word I was trying to look for. If you go to the showcases and just kind of dig and say, okay, let me see what they're showcasing, you're actually going to find the majority of websites in the showcase are websites that should not have been built with Drupal. And the reason is because I'm about to go through some of the examples of what I'm referring to. The number one website are what I call brochure websites. These are the majority. In fact, I would say 80% of all websites in the showcase would be considered brochure websites. And a brochure website, I mean, this is kind of I know it's kind of small for you to look at, but it just gives you the idea. It's a website that people can come to. They're going to come anonymously. They're coming to check things out, learn about your company. Where do I look at a contact form? There might even be some comments amongst members. But for the most part, this is a website in which they're showcasing something. It's a business. It's an online page where people can learn about your business. This is what's called a brochure website. And I'm going to say brochure websites, Drupal is not the best fit for that. In fact, if anything, Drupal is a horrible fit for brochure websites because there's a lot of infrastructure that's involved with Drupal. You have to worry about a server, you have to worry about databases, you have to worry about security updates. Can you imagine having just a simple brochure website and you have SQL injection and some hacker gets in there and starts changing your brochure? Those are things you have to worry about if you use Drupal. You have to worry about keeping their system up to date. So therefore, there's a maintenance cost involved. And all of this, just to have a brochure, you should not do it. Don't torture yourselves. Don't use Drupal in that situation. So through this presentation, what I want to do, and I don't want to approach you with, don't do this, don't do that, and then kind of leave you hanging on where you're saying, okay, I shouldn't use Drupal, so what should I use? What I'd really like to do is say, don't use Drupal, but then offer you what I consider to be the solution instead, and talk through that. And so hopefully that's okay. I know this is a Drupal meetup, but I am going to be talking over some other technologies that should be used instead, if that's all right with you guys. So with brochure websites, what should you use instead? And there's something called a static site generator that you should be using. And if you want to learn more about static site generators, they're really major. They're up and coming at this point. They're super simple to build a website. And there's a lot of places that host them for free, like GitHub. You can post your static website on GitHub, and you can wipe your hands clean of paying a server. You will not have to pay for a server. GitHub will just host it for you. It's awesome. In fact, my website, travistidwell.com, if you guys go there, was built with a static site generator. And you'll notice that there's comments, I have articles, I have all these kind of things that you would say, oh, I need Drupal for that. I built my personal website with a static site generator, and I'm never going back. It is the way to do it. Obviously, I'm going to have my favorites. So if you have a chance to look at Wintersmith, it's really good. It uses Node. So Wintersmith is great. There's also another really popular one called Jekyll. In fact, they're really all great. Where they're all going to be different is what templating engine that they use or allow for plugins. So when you're working in Drupal, you're going to have to learn a templating engine anyway. I recommend ones that kind of stick true to the Twig, which is the Drupal templating engine. One great thing about Drupal 8, by the way, is Drupal 8's templates will be compatible with static site generators, meaning they're all based on Twig. And because they're based on Twig, you can actually take your templates you build in a static site generator and plug it into Drupal. In fact, that's probably a great way to stage your template. Build it in a static site generator. Once you got your template working the way you want it, then you can easily port it over to a Drupal 8 website. Highly recommend that. There's also another templating engine called Node.js, which is for Wintersmith. It also has a static site generator. Another thing I want to talk to people about is bootstrapping a project. So whenever you're getting started with any project, there's this work in just getting it started. Okay, now I have to read docs about something else. I have to learn, how to install it. There's a lot of learning involved when you're learning a new technology. And there is a tool out there to help you with that, and it's called Yeoman. And Yeoman is a great tool that quite literally is a way to bootstrap a project quickly. And so that you can just type a single command within your terminal and it'll bootstrap everything for you. In fact, there's some really great ones for static site generators. I'm actually even going to show you what it does just so you guys can see it. So here's how you install it. You have to use Node. It's all Node, so you use npm. Then you would install what's called a generator, and that's what will actually generate the site for you. And then from there, you just type yo, and then you're up and running. Yo, and then whatever the generator's name is. I am going to do somewhat of a shameless plug for those of you who kind of want to know what I've been working on lately. I've actually been kind of working in this area lately, a lot with Node.js. I've been doing a lot with static sites over at All Players. We're heavily investing in static sites. I also created a plugin where I combine that Wintersmith with the templating engine called Node.js. And then I also combine that with Bootstrap. And so I created this project that combines the three. I'm going to show it to you real quick just to show you how fast you can get something going. I had to think of a good name for it, really couldn't come up with something, so the best I can come up with is, well, I can kind of mix Nunjucks and Bootstrap together and get Juckstrap. So it's an unfortunate name, but that's what I stuck with just because it's easy to remember. So you can actually do an npm install of the generator Juckstrap and then type yo Juckstrap. And I'm just going to show you guys how easy this is and just show you what this does. So here I'm just going to go into my examples folder. I'm going to make a new directory. And so let's say I just want to get started with using a static site generator. I've already downloaded those things, so all I have to do is type yo. Oh, yeah. Is that better? And so what you actually get is what Yeoman does is it kind of asks you questions. Okay, what do you want to name your app? Okay, well this is, I can call it my site. Do you have a Google Analytics account? So you can automatically plug this in, company's name, All Players. And what this actually does is this goes out, grabs all the code, it builds it for you, puts everything where it's supposed to be. Then it runs Grunt on it, which it grunts like a task builder. And then not only that, it actually spins up a local server for you so that you can test it. So no more messing around with, oh, I need to host my Drupal site. How am I going to test it? Oh, I need to do a virtual machine, and there's no more of that. This will actually spin up a server for you. It does take a while to install, but once this is done, I'm going to demonstrate something to you that's really going to kind of blow your mind a little bit. So there it's installing Phantom. Then it's doing installs, and then it's doing some build routines. And Yeoman does all this for you. It runs some tests for you. And then after it's done doing that, it runs Wintersmith, and then it spins up a new server, and it should launch. Oh, you know what? I bet it launched it in there. So actually, I'm going to exit full screen here. View. How do I get out of exit full screen? Enter full screen. Okay, hang on. I think I may have found a little glitch with... Okay, so anyway, what it does, I can just go back and forth like that. It basically creates everything for you. So if I was actually messing around with this, let's look at my example folder. Inside the app folder, it does all templates. So you're already used to templates with Drupal. And so I could easily, what's great about this is it watches whatever files I change. And so no more messing around with creating content types, creating blocks. All I have to do is change something and save it, and it will automatically update it on the fly as I type and save. It's just doing it. And so while I'm developing, that's what I'm saying. This is a great tool for prototyping. I can develop, and it just sits there and puts things, and I can see what I'm doing in the next screen if I have two screens. And so there's really no more messing around with the Drupal templating language. So it's really great for that. Now I got to figure out how to get, oh, you know what? Here it is. My presentation. Oh my gosh. It might be, oh, here we go. Ah, there, good, okay. So that gives you a little bit of insight into what you can do with the static site generator. So in a matter of like 2 minutes, I spun something up by typing one command that would typically take, someone who's very fresh to it a day to get set up. I mean, they would have to install a database, get a server set up. So for static sites, don't use Drupal, use static site generators. Let's talk about mobile. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because this is where Drupal is really making a catch-up. And they're doing a lot of really good work as far as trying to make a platform that can serve mobile content. And in order to have this discussion, I really want to talk about this new push, which is this. A lot of people are familiar with the mobile first. There's this mobile first push where you don't build a website unless you build it on the mobile device first. Well, the new thing is API first. And API first basically says that any platform or any site or anything that you want to build the API first and then build the interface around it. And that's really kind of how mobile apps work. I also think it's very important to make a distinction between mobile apps and a mobile site. A mobile app is completely API driven, very user-facing heavy, to where the user interacts with it. It automatically, immediately updates. It maybe calls an API to the server to retrieve content, and then it immediately updates in their device. Versus a mobile website, which is quite literally your template is built to be responsive, and so therefore when you click a button, you have to wait for the page to load, you have to wait for the submission to be made. Everything I'm referring to when I talk about API first, I'm talking about the first one, which is we're talking about applications that were built around an API. It's becoming way more prevalent. There's also a lot of talk these days about Drupal's response to this, which they're calling it headless Drupal. Anytime you hear someone talk about headless Drupal, this is what they're talking about. They're talking about, let's use Drupal as this API engine, and to where it is quite literally serving content via API, and so therefore whatever app you build is an abstracted user interface that is simply a user interaction to this API. So all UI uses the API to communicate to the server. I know this is getting really deep into geek talk, and I apologize about that. But
No, you don't.
yeah, but APIs are a great thing. I'm totally on board with this movement. In fact, I know it's kind of small. It says basically explaining what I just said, using Drupal as a backend server to front-end applications and mobile apps. That's what they mean by API. In fact, I really want to say that Drupal 8 gives us a fighting chance here. And in fact, I'm only talking about Drupal 8 at this point. Just so everyone knows, Drupal 7, in my opinion, is kind of a lost cause when it comes to API development. You can use it for APIs. You're not going to get performant APIs. You can have high concurrency issues, which means if you have a lot of people hitting the API, it's going to cause massive problems. But Drupal made a wonderful choice in picking Symfony as its base, because that really does fix the problem for Drupal. They are now considered a modern framework in which you can build your platform on top of. And it all does this through Symfony. So Symfony is a PHP framework that Drupal 8 was built on top of, and Symfony is really the hero here, where it provides that API layer ability so that you can build these apps that sit on top of an API, all through Drupal. But I kind of also want to make a point here, which is Symfony is the hero here on this API. So even though you hear a lot of people say, oh yeah, Drupal's got all that now, Drupal's got all that now. Let's go back to the original question. Do you need Drupal? And my comeback to that is it depends. It really depends. It depends on what you want to do. Even with Drupal 8 in all of its glory, it may actually be hitting it with too big of a hammer if you say, I'm going to use Drupal to solve this problem. When really what you could actually end up doing is building a Symfony app. If you have very small requirements, you can build an easy Symfony app that basically hooks up all the API endpoints that you need for your app to run, and you would never be happier because you've reduced complexity, you've reduced dependency on having the regular update pushes, and overall your entire stack becomes simpler. So let's talk about the cases where you really don't need Drupal as a backend. Obviously, the simple brochure apps. Surprisingly, there's more what I consider brochure apps than you think, where they're just apps that are just informative. They're like, click this and I'll give you some information. Click this and I'll give you some information. Do not build those with Drupal as a backend. It just makes no sense to do that. In fact, you can almost compile that information into the app. Another thing that you hear a lot called single-purpose apps. These are applications that exist only to serve a very specific, very single purpose, like a texting app. Like the Yo app is a great example, where I want to build an app where all you can do is text people Yo. You would never use Drupal as the backend for that. It just does not make sense. It has a single purpose, so therefore you're going to radically simplify your infrastructure if you pick a different technology. And then obviously gaming apps I think fit in that category as well. I mean, really all you're worried about is possibly sharing some scores. There might even be some Socket.io pushes between the apps. In any case, you don't really necessarily need Drupal to manage that. So let's talk about when does it make sense to use Drupal. And so, well, really, multi-user publishing apps. The apps that involve multiple users, and those users end up publishing something to the end server. So if you have a bunch of users in your network, and these people are actually doing something and publishing something and maybe interacting with each other, what you just described falls into that camp. So I agree, you picked correctly when you said Drupal. Those fall into the categories of, yes, you need Drupal for that. It's really good at that. And in fact, it's the best at that. News apps. So anything that involves workflows. So any type you're thinking of a news, you're talking about people who are putting content through a work stream. Okay, you have a publisher who works on a piece of content. They push it to a different state, and that triggers this person to come work on it maybe a little bit, add images. Then that gets pushed into a new state, and then from there it gets published. You need Drupal for that. And then also, obviously, I know the last one is kind of obvious, but I had to put it there. If your mobile app is a mobile version of a Drupal site, don't rebuild the APIs. Just, in that case, hook up the services module. I think that's what the services module was intended for. A lot of people, what they do is they'll say, I want to build an app, and the only module they have installed is the services module. I slap their hand. I say, you are using the services module to be your API backend, when really the purpose of the services module is to hook up endpoints to an already existing Drupal infrastructure. That's my opinion. I know this is a heavily opinioned presentation, but I think that makes sense to me. Let's talk about other contenders. So if it's not Drupal, what are some other contenders for this API first? There are surprisingly a lot out there. I'm going to give you a very opinionated list of my favorites. So if I'm given some requirements that don't fall into the Drupal camp, I'll look at Laravel, which is another Symfony framework. It's built on Symfony just like Drupal, but it's more Ruby. It's more Rails. If anybody's familiar with Ruby on Rails, it feels more like Ruby on Rails. So you kind of get more control over setting up your models, and you get the MVC architecture that a lot of people like. There's also another one that's kind of up and coming called Flatiron that I really like a lot. There's one called Sales.js. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that just so happens to be my favorite. And there's also many others. And then, of course, my personal favorite, if you guys ever have a chance to look at it, Sales.js, which is a Node.js framework, is wonderful at hooking up very simple APIs and just getting them working. And you can have high concurrency, millions of people hitting your site at the same time. You don't have to worry about that with Node. I mean, it depends on what it's doing, but for the most part, it has really good with high concurrency. So if you have a lot of mobile devices hitting the server, Node handles it beautifully. I also kind of want to talk a little bit about why I currently prefer Node.js, and not necessarily to say that I don't like Drupal or I don't like PHP, but I do have a preference. If somebody comes to me with a project idea and they say, I want to build this, I immediately start with Node. And only do I get to Drupal after the...
Back up for 2 minutes, explain the difference between like Node and Apache.
Yeah, okay. Node.js. Node.js is a backend server. It's really, it is really a wrapper around JavaScript for the server. Is the best way to describe Node. It is a way that you can write JavaScript. So we're all web developers. You're gonna know JavaScript anyway. That's why I love it. And so you're essentially writing JavaScript on the server to do things like PHP. Like with PHP, you could write some scripts that would, serve up content as people request to the server. Node.js does the exact same thing, except you're using JavaScript instead of PHP. That's what I love about it. I love that you only have to learn one language. And if you guys want any advice from me, I'm gonna
so devoid of it so far.
I'm gonna jam it down your throat anyway. But if you were to learn one language ever, learn JavaScript. Period. If you were to learn one language ever, JavaScript's it. The reason why is because JavaScript is the ubiquitous language. I see it as you can run it on the server, you can run it on the browser. JavaScript is essentially taking over, in my opinion. There's a lot of people who probably have other opinions. But what I was actually saying is, whenever someone comes to me with a project, the very first thing that I do is I start with Node. And I get to Drupal if the requirements kind of eclipse that bridge that I was describing earlier. If their requirements get into the realm of like, okay, now we're talking about Drupal, that's when I start talking about Drupal. But I start with Node. And the reason why I do that is because Node has this wonderful benefit of having a built-in HTTP layer, which means you don't have to mess with Apache. You don't have to mess with Nginx. Node just hooks up to the HTTP request directly. PHP cannot exist without the HTTP servers, the Apaches and Nginx. If you install Node on your server, that is all you need to serve a website. It's amazing as far as maintaining a server. It also loves high concurrency situations. And what I mean by high concurrency is a bunch of people hitting the system at once. And PHP, let me rephrase that. PHP out of the box is horrible at high concurrency situations. It spins up a new thread for every single connection that it makes, and it ends up gobbling a lot of memory, and you end up having to have a massive server to help support it. Node is event-driven. It's just an event loop that just waits for people to connect, and it just serves them as fast as it possibly can, and it's really good at it. Node also works seamlessly with static sites, and it sounds like Drupal's getting there, from what I heard. But I think there's still somewhat of a where you can have one, or you can't necessarily have both.
Yeah, I mean, according to Randall last month, it's not easy. There's still a lot of work.
Yeah,
to get to that point.
so Node, it's seamless. You can have a static site, but then yet also use those templates to serve content, and it all exists in the same folder. So you have a single template, and if somebody doesn't hit a path that calls a template and that template exists, it just serves the template statically. And Node does that for you automatically. So it's so seamless. It really is no hassle away. I also want to talk a little bit about this build up versus chisel away development. And you run into this a lot with Drupal, where instead of actually building something, you're starting with something massive like a distro, and you spend more time chiseling away at it of what you don't need. And so that type of mentality actually is somewhat frustrating, where you're actually more chiseling away at what you don't need versus, you know what, I'm only going to build exactly what I need. And a lot of times you end up with a better product when you start with the former, that you're going to build from the ground up versus starting up here and then chiseling it away. Drupal is really good about giving you the basics, though. So it gives you the basics. The problem is when they give you the basics, it's hard to learn how, from that point, how do I configure things correctly to make it be what I want. So it's a different type of mentality. And I'm just going to show code just because I love it, just to show how easy it is for Node to expose an endpoint. And something like this in Drupal is really hard to do. And it's just a couple of lines of code in Node that you can actually create an API that serves up users, a JSON collection of users. And then I can easily hook this up to a database, and I suddenly have an API. Yeah, if I can, yeah. That's probably a little bit better, right? It's just a little bit of code to actually get you there in Node. And in a lot of cases, that's all you need. You don't really need, you just need a light server that's sitting and it's serving content, and that's all you need. So let me just talk about a few closing comments. Use Drupal how it was intended and you will be happy. Drupal is amazing. It is an amazing tool and it has a purpose. And if you use it for what it was intended, like what sounds like you're on the mark on using it correctly, that's where you'll be happy with Drupal. Stop saying can and start saying should. And I'm referring to that in terms of, yeah, Drupal can do that. Don't say that anymore. In fact, I don't want people to say that. I want people to start replacing can with should. Instead saying, yeah, Drupal should do that. You know, it should. That makes sense that Drupal should do that. Also, never stop exploring other alternatives. A lot of times people, they learn something and they're like, okay, because this can do everything, all I have to learn is this, and therefore I can do everything. It's really not the way it works, and it's not the best way to build something. Drupal 8 will solve many things, but it still should be evaluated when deciding platforms. So Drupal 8 is wonderful, and it solves a lot, but it's not. It doesn't mean that okay, now Drupal can be used for everything. We have Drupal 8, so therefore now it can be used for everything. You still have to evaluate. And also, I look forward to the day when Drupal should do everything. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much. Go forth and build something cool. Thank you.
So, those were so even a basic brochure site can really benefit from a lot of the Drupal modules.